Welcome back to Programming with Qt Widgets. In this episode, we'll continue our discussion on proxy models. We saw the foundation of it just in the previous episode where we talked about proxy models. In this episode, I'll show you two examples of proxy models and I'll give you a reference to a third one. That should hopefully get you started. As we saw in the previous episode, a proxy model is something that sits between a view and a model. And we might stack a bunch of these, which is possible because the model or the proxy model is implementing the interface of QAbstractProxyModel. And it listens to the signals of the model that it's connecting to. We saw there were two different classes. There was QIdentityProxyModel and QSortFilterProxyModel. And I'll show you examples of those in this episode here. Let's start out with the QIdentityProxyModel. I know you're eager to go and see some real code, so let's just look at this slide really fast. What you're looking at here are 6 methods, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 methods from the QAbstractProxyModel API that you can and may want to override from the QIdentityProxyModel interface. QIdentityProxyModel, obviously subclass from QAbstractProxyModel, so you have all the available methods there, but for it to not change stuff, you would not override something like row count, because row count is already specified by the source model that you are a proxy to, and the QIdentityProxyModel's implementation of row count simply calls upon the source class's row count. But you might change data, and in that situation, you might change what a display role looks like. You might also change some of the other roles, as I will live code for you in just a minute. And if you start counting the seconds now, a minute is now. That was a fast minute, wasn't it? We are implementing an example, and the code or the example, you can see it here. I have two views on a model. This is the unmodified model, and this is the proxy model that sits between this view here and this model that you see over here. And what it does, as you can see, it's just capitalizing the words. The playlist model, which is where it starts out, well, actually, as I always say, let's start with the main. Main has an instance of playlist model, and that's a very simple implementation of QAbstractList model. It could even have been a QString list model because there really isn't all that much going on. And then I have the AllUpperCaseProxyModel, which is what I'm going to show here. And I say proxy model, set source model with this model here. And I say view down here, right view, set model with the AllUpperCaseProxyModel down here. And the rest is just setting up that stuff. Let's look at the AllUpperCaseProxyModel. It's subclass from QIdentityProxyModel, as I hinted already, and it simply implements the data method. This method here should just have been a using QIdentityProxyModel : QIdentityProxyModel, because this is not 2010 anymore, but hey, that's cool. The data method is simply going and asking for the data itself. So it goes to the superclass and say, hey, can you give me the data at this index here that I was asked for and this role? And if we're talking about the display role, then I will take the string that was being displayed, uppercase that, and return that. And if not, then I'll just return the value that the superclass gave me. And that's super important that you remember to return the value from the superclass. I have an assert here that says check index, and if you watched the episode on check_index that I implemented, which we saw a few episodes back, then I would likely have done that today in my code. And just because I like a good challenge, I will now switch over to doing some live coding, standing up, tilted in front of my keyboard, so it's going to go really bad, I'm sure, but hey, bear with me, because what I want to show you, which this example doesn't, but it could have, is that you can actually answer on based on different roles. So what I want to do here is that I'll say if it's display role, otherwise if the role is the foreground color row. Let's go background color row. Then what I would like to do is that I will change the background if it's a piece of audio. And the reason why I chose a piece of audio is because how do I know? Well, that will show you a trick that I think I've shown you a couple of times before. If not, then it's definitely time to do that by now. What I will do is I'll go to my model for, well, let's just go to the playlist model. I'll go over here to my playlist model. And now I will add a new role. I'll say enum role. And as you might have noticed, I would have in my own code written enum class role, but then I need the operator plus, and we might or not have talked about that. We'll definitely talk about that in the Qt Widgets and more, which I recorded years ago already. And the new role is media role. It's a Qt : see, it goes well when I type standing up. Qt : user role. You're right so much. Actually, user role is just fine here. So now I have a new role. It's just the data will be answering based on that. And the role here, enum, I'm switching for, is it the display role? Is it the decoration role? And then are we talking about the media role? Well, in that case, I will return entry dot, well, I'll return, entry.media type. And now you say, well, Jesper, isn't the media type already shown up here? Well, it is not really. It's in decoration role. That's a given color here. That's the box in front of it. So I could have gone and asked for the decoration role. And if it was green, then I knew it was audio and so on. But hey, that is cheating. Sometimes I have some data that is not even visible on the screen that I still would like to get as my media type here. And now I'm answering for this media type. And I go back to my model now, my AllUpperCase model. And I can say, if the role is background. Well, what I want then is I want to have auto, well, it's a QString, we know that. QString, come on. The GitHub Copilot is helping me out. Let's see if it does the right thing. IdentityProxyModel data, well, that I already did ask for, didn't I? Well, data, well, that's the value we have up there. So I already have this. Well, no, I don't, because I want a different role. So it is entirely right. I will now go and ask my superclass for the data, for the given index, but this time it's going to be playlist model media type. And we better include our playlist model so we have that, which is basically asking for, can you give me the data for this index with the row 1024 or whatever that number is. That is a string that returns back to me, and I'll look at that. And then I'll say return media type equal to audio, then green, otherwise blue. Is it audio? Let's just go and look here. The media type is audio or video, so it's likely it is definitely in lowercase, so audio. But otherwise, and just so I can have some influence on my code here, yellow and cyan. And let's run it. Did I forget anything? I don't think. So now you can see that it's yellow for audio and cyan for video. And again, well, I already have that information encoded in the decoration here. Yes, I know, but I just wanted to show you that the proxy model can change not just the role that is being asked. It can go and it could have gone and asked whether there was more than 3 syllables in the name, and in that case it should have done something, or whether go and ask for any of the other information from the source model. But it must always just answer for given index. It cannot start changing the structure. That's what the QIdentityProxyModel is all about. That was QIdentityProxyModel. And just remember, you saw it with me first, the trick about creating these additional rows, because I'm going to show you an example now that I entirely forgot about actually does the same thing. But hey, slowing down sometimes helps remember stuff, and the extra rows in there is a super important trick for when you have proxy models. And let's just wait for a second here to meditate on why that is important. Well, it's important because if I have some kind of complex proxy models in my stack that say filters, and another one that swaps rows and columns, and yet another one that does some other transformation, when I at the top want to know something from the bottom, I will at the top say, hey, for this particular cell, what is the media type? And it will go to the proxy model underneath. And that proxy model might filter out a bunch of things. So what in my topmost view of it looks like row 3, column 7, might actually in the model below be row 7, column 3. And in the one that it talks to be row 257, because it was filtering out a lot of stuff. But each of those proxy models will know how to go from the transformed index into the index that they are talking about. And that makes it possible for me to simply go and say, hey, model at the top here, or the model that I'm talking to, can you tell me what is that particular row? And it will swap around and be whatever the proxy models underneath does, but it'll nevertheless get to the bottommost model and get that information. I have in Qt Widgets and more a whole episode on that, which I will link to in a few episodes where I'll tell you about all the 20 different episodes from Qt Widgets and more. However, we're talking about two proxy models now. Well, actually one proxy model, namely QSortFilterProxyModel, which has two roles, sort and filter. And the way that it works is that with the QSortFilterProxyModel, you can specify the sort role, the sort column, and the sort order, and you put that into your stack, and it will sort the source model according to these things. So it might sort on this column, ascending or descending, and it might not just use the display role, it might use a sort role, which you might have implemented yourself. Then the filtering part of the QSortFilterProxyModel, and you usually do it with two different instances. There you specify either the filter regexp, the filter string, the filter whatever, and the set filter role if it should filter on a specific other role. And then it will filter your model. You can do that by not subclassing, by just using a subset of these methods, or you can subclass for filtering. Or for sorting, you'll implement less than and it takes a source index from the left and the right, and it will compare these two and tell whether the one from left is less than the one from the right. An example of that is that if you have, for example, instances of something that is not just strings that you want to compare, so your model might be returning you instances of a class called money, and that money has its own operator less than, then you can check whether that is actually a money instance and use that instead of just converting it to a string and comparing two strings. For filtering, we have filter except rows and filter except columns, which basically given an index given a source parent and an index, it tells whether that one should be filtered in or out. And I'll show you examples of these two right now. So what you see here is two proxy models at play. On the left side, we have the model that has not been proxied in any way. And over here, we actually have the result of two different proxy models. One proxy model, which I can enable and disable with this checkbox here, filters out the audio, so we only see the video. And the other sorts the data. So you can see it says, enjoy the silence and farewell, but it says big Buck Bunny and the matrix, and the reason why these two are swapped is that their duration, which I cannot see anywhere in the user interface here, is actually so that this one is shorter than this one. Let's see the code for this. First of all, the playlist model now have been updated with roles as we saw before. And the role is answered in my data method. My data method will check for whether it's display role, decoration role, tooltip role, but also if it's my own duration role, media role, producer role, and title role. And most noticeable in this example here, duration role actually returns the duration, something that is not visible in the user interface. With that in mind, my duration sort proxy model over here implements less than, and the less than simply go and ask for the data. I have a source right here and a source left, so it needs to compare these two. So it goes and asks for the data for the duration role, which I know is an integer because I am the one implementing this proxy model and I am the one that implement the source model, so they know something about each other, and I can go and ask for duration role and convert it to an integer. And now I can compare these two left and right. Over in our main, we had the other proxy model, the video filter proxy model, and the video filter proxy model implements this slot video filter enabled, which is connected to my checkbox so that I can enable and disable it. And it implements filter except rows. And filter except rows says, yes, that is awesome. You can do that if I am not enabled. If I am enabled, then I will go and ask the source model, not calling my superclass, but instead going to my source model and saying, hey, source model, for this source row at column 0, which is I don't have more than one column in here. Source model column 0, and with this source parent, which again, I'm not a tree, so it will always just be QModel index, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, but it could be more generic. I go and ask for the index, and then I'll go and say index.data, and that is just as we saw a bit ago. Well, let me just show you it again. Pressing F2 here, the data method is just going to the model and asking for the data with this given index. So index.data, shortcut for model pointer data with this index, and then the media type role. And I'm asking for the media type this time, which again, I did in the previous hand-coded exercise. And if the media type is video, then it should be included, otherwise not. I also have my video filter enable changed signal here. I don't think I use that for anything, but it's a good practice. But what I definitely do have is whenever I toggle my filter here, I call invalidate filter, which means that the proxy model will tell the view, hey, you need to go and ask me about everything again because now my data has changed. And the first thing you'll go and ask is how many rows do you have? And to be able to answer that, it will call upon the source model with all the possible indexes and run it through filter except row, set up a mapping itself where it knows that row 0 should be included, row 1 in the source model should be row 27 in the row 1 in the filtered model should be row 27 in source model because row 2 to 26 should not be included. I'm just making it up, and so on. So it sets up this model behind the stage. And what does it do in addition? It listens very careful to signals like row changed and column changed and whatnot on the source model because that table might change based on that. So we've seen QIdentityProxyModel and we've seen QSortFilterProxyModel. And now you have the expectation that, hey, should you not show me an instance of QAbstractProxyModel, the golden standard for doing a lot of changes to stuff? And no, I'm not going to do that because that is a lot of work. I have implemented a very simple task that turned out to be a lot of work, namely a reverse proxy model, one that takes row 0 and makes that into row n-1, row 1 into n-2, row, and you get the idea. It just takes a list of rows and flip them around. I did that in Qt Widgets and more, and it turned out to be 2 episodes, each order of magnitude half an hour long where I not even coded it. I just walked through the solution and discussed what it was. It's a lot of work, something you would likely not want to do unless you have a very generic task that you want to be usable throughout a lot of places. But go and watch these 2 episodes. It is a lot of fun, and it will definitely give you a very good reason to add unit testing to your setup if you don't have that already, because that kind of model you definitely want to unit test enormously. Black belt in migration. That's not a title you can buy every day. But in QApp, we've done millions of lines of migrations. If you are on MFC or on Photon, we can help you modernize your UI. Talk to us. Psst. Can you keep a secret? Okay. I likely will not want to go and implement yet another QAbstractProxyModel instance after I did those 2 episodes. And the reason why is that it's just a lot of work. And you need to be thinking careful about how do the indexes swap around. And more often, what I would simply do is that I would subclass QAbstractItemModel, or maybe even just QAbstractTableModel, if that's just something I want to do in tables. And I would be getting a source model, but I would not implement it via the looking up indexes mechanism. There is map to source and map from source, which is what the QAbstractProxyModel is all about. But instead, I would simply implement my own version of a QAbstractTableModel and use another model which I would ask questions. In any case, however you do it, please do listen careful to the signals of the source model, at least if the source model could potentially change. I have a lot of examples, and I did start out in the episode on the proxy models on Qt Widgets and more. I started out saying, well, I'm doing this exercise for you because not for me. In my setup, I know that the underlying models are not really changing, so I do not need to listen to all those signals, which is what is all the problem in all of this. But I could have, and if my source model actually do change, I do need to listen to those signals. And it might be that there's a row inserted that I don't care about, but it could be that there is a row inserted or columns inserted or data change or whatever that I do care about. In those situations, I need to tell my view or proxy model sitting above me so they know that something changed inside of me. And that's what it says here on this slide. Do listen to those signals. And a final word of warning is never ever give out somebody else's source model. Create or somebody else's indexes. Create your own indexes. And actually, if you do use the check underscore framework that I showed you a few episodes back, then it will check for those indexes. And if you are wondering how difficult can it be, how dangerous can it be, well, just imagine a very, very simple proxy model that flips rows and columns. So if something is 3 rows and 4 columns, it will be 4 rows and 3 columns. So flips along the identity axis. And imagine that you gave out an index there. Then you, as a view, would be going to the model and saying, hey, model, can you give me something on row 3, column 0? And what you get back is something on row 0, column 3, namely what the underlying model was doing. And if you gave that one back, then you would ask for row 3, column 0. And when you looked into the index, it would tell you something completely different. And the view might very well get confused. So never, ever give out somebody else's index. Create your own. And of course, this is important, especially when you talk about tree models, where the models themselves store some data inside of those indexes. But hey, that might be an episode for Qt Widgets and more. I haven't recorded yet how to go around doing that, but I might. So stay tuned on Qt Widgets and more. This was it for this episode of Proxy Models. I have really only scratched the surface on proxy models. I urge you to go back in the previous episode and look at those 2 links that I gave you. That will already show you 10 different proxy models and give you some inspiration to what could be a proxy model. It is, as I said earlier on, both the curse and the blessing of the model view framework. It's a blessing because it gives a good separation of responsibility. You can put it into different classes. One class is taking care of flipping stuff around, another one for highlighting, yet another one for capitalizing, whatever. But it's also a curse because once your view call into a model, that model will call into another model, which will call into yet another model, which will be somewhat difficult to debug. Now you've been warned. All the best of luck with your proxy models. That's it. Until next time, have a great time.